Greetings, sailors! So, I'm back from Poland, and I thought I'd do a little video on my thoughts and experiences of the event, because it was actually really interesting seeing one of these ESL events from the inside, as it were, because I really don't have a lot of experience with this kind of thing. I've been invited to one other thing by Wargaming, that was Bowington Tankfest last year, which was quite a different thing, as you can imagine. So, for those of you that are somehow unaware, the ESL Finals took place last week on Friday and Saturday, and in between the semi-finals and the finals on the Saturday, they actually decided they were going to have a World of Warships showmatch event to try and show off the potential for having warships as an esports event, specifically team battles from warships. And I have to admit, I was kind of skeptical at the thought. But if we can take nothing else away from it, or if I can take nothing else away from it, I think actually it is entirely possible, having been there firsthand and seen it. Now, the reaction was a bit mixed, because basically this was all put together at very short notice. There were a lot of issues that came up. And most of them, I would say sort of 80 to 90%, came down to the fact that this was all put together in a matter of weeks. So this was a relatively late addition to the Wargaming Grand Finals, and I think it showed. I think it really showed. Now, to my way of looking at it, the problems that there were, it was like 80% presentation and maybe 20% format. And I've actually written a couple of bullet points down. I'll go over the issues first, and then I'll say what I think about possibly future things, and then maybe I'll give a little rundown of my thoughts and impressions of being there. Otherwise, I'm going to have photos in the background, by the way, and once I've run out of photos, I'll just put up some of the footage from the ESL stream itself. But yeah, basically, presentation and format, and I'll actually talk about format first, because that is maybe the more kind of the one that might not necessarily be apparent to people watching, even those that are familiar with warships, and even those that were familiar with warships had a hard time following what was going on, but we'll come to that. So basically it was a kind of custom server with a custom client, and it looked a little bit different from all warships, but it was essentially just the standard team battles format. So each team was limited to carrier, 2 battleships, and then whatever else setup they liked out of 7 players. And as you are probably aware, the standard length of battle for warships is 20 minutes. Now, given how fast the regular World of Tanks games were, or well, I say regular, the tournament World of Tanks games were taking, I mean, there is a hard time limit of 10 minutes in the ESL matches, and most of the games weren't even taking that. On some of the maps, the action was very, very fast indeed. So we had the issue, and we knew we were going to have this issue beforehand, of not making things drag out. So because we had the potential to run to 20 minutes, we were very aware of not wanting to run for 20 minutes, because 3 20-minute matches is an hour, and everybody's sitting waiting there for the finals. So what we did ourselves and the German team led by Mutality, beforehand we went, right, okay, we're not going to draw this out. We're going to play fairly aggressive. And we were both playing to win. I mean, I absolutely don't want to make it sound like there was attempts to fix the outcomes of the match or anything. We absolutely were both teams playing to win, but we were also not playing as we would have played in standard team battles, because we only really had a chance to sit down and practice on the Saturday itself. Because this was also last minute, we were supposed to have booths for ourselves, because all the World of Tanks teams in attendance had their own booths where they could set up on PCs in those booths, and they had their own space where they could leave their stuff and all that. We didn't have that on the Friday at all. They hadn't actually put in booths for us, so we had to wait till the Saturday after some of the teams had been knocked out of the contest, basically, out of the tournament. So that made the time even more limited. But one of the things that arose when we were playing some practice matches against each other was that the matches lasting kind of 18, 19 minutes, it was going to take too long. So that's one of the things. And in terms of format, I think what they could do is what they do with World of Tanks, is they could maybe limit it to 15 minutes. But there are other things, of course, because one of the things that makes Warships games takes longer is the maps are much bigger. And this also ties into issues later on that I'm going to talk about with the camera work. But just in terms of the length of the matches, because the maps are bigger, you take longer to get places. That also is a potential issue. So what they could do, I think, in terms of the format, if they want this to be an ESL thing, is I think they could have shorter matches, shorter time limits, maybe limited to 15 minutes. 10 minutes probably not feasible, but 15, I think so, just because of the nature of team battles versus random battles. They could have maybe smaller maps. And one of the things I should note is that it was a random map rotation for us. With the ESL games, they knew in advance what maps they were going to get, so they could pick out a custom lineup of ships. We had a random rotation of 3 maps, and that caused an issue in the third match, actually, because we went with a cruiser heavy setup, and then ended up with basically the worst map for that cruiser heavy setup. So people, I did see 1 or 2 comments of people wondering if we threw the third match, but we really didn't. It's just we ended up with a completely unsuitable setup for that map. So that's actually another thing, map rotation. Another format thing is maybe they could do what they do with the World of Tanks games and actually have a set map like progression, so you know what maps you're going to get, so you know what lineups you can use. Because we ended up, for the first 2 games, we just used a fairly kind of standard setup, and there wasn't much variation between the teams with those setups because we didn't know what maps we were going to get. And when we initially thought we were going to get Land of Fire for that third match, that could have been really good with our cruiser setup. And then there were some technical derps. And actually both teams experienced those technical derps. On my team, on the Dead Admirals, it was actually myself. Basically my ship wouldn't move, and I couldn't fire my guns. And at least one member of the other team, Vitality's team, the Germans, experienced that as well. So that's why we had to restart that third match. But I think that would be very beneficial. So maybe having teams spawn closer to each other, or maybe having custom maps that are specifically for esports, smaller maps, kind of like Solomon Islands sized maybe. Or I don't know, there's things you could do. You could even have existing maps but move the placement of the capture circles, for instance. Smaller maps, by the way, I mean, it's not ideal, especially for the carriers, because the carrier play component is quite a big, it's quite an important part of team battles, and so smaller maps would make knocking out carriers especially easy. But the thing is, though, also, if you want the action to be a bit more concentrated, then maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing. In terms of the ship roster, the actual ships we were using, there was definitely some negative feedback on the fact that it was mostly premiums. And I can kind of see why. Now, it's just a matter of fact that the Atago at the moment for team battles is the best cruiser for doing damage. It's got good torpedoes, it's got good guns, it's reasonably fast, it's got the ability to heal itself, and it's actually got a very good fire chance with those HE shells, which is very important for taking down opposing battleships. The New Orleans, the Chapayev, the what's the other one? The Megami, they just don't have the same capacity, basically. So yeah, it's just a fact that the Atago is the best one. And it's a little more mixed with, I mean, the battleships in particular, which is more my area of speciality. The Tirpitz has got maneuverability, it's got the rate of fire, it's got the turret turn, it's got torpedoes, it's got decent anti-air. But I think you could use an Amagi or a North Carolina also. It's just, for our team, I mean, I can't speak for Arun, but for myself, the Tirpitz is the ship I'm most comfortable with. The North Carolina, with the accounts we had, we basically got 19-point captains and a bunch of ships, like pre-unlocked for us. I played a couple of games in North Carolina versus the bots, and in one of the training matches we had beforehand. That was literally the first time I'd ever played in North Carolina, so I wasn't going to try a ship that I'd never played before, really, aside from those couple of matches, in front of an audience of, over 20,000, if you count the people that were there and the people that were watching on Twitch. So I went with what I knew, which was with the Tirpitz. But I think, honestly, the Tirpitz is probably, again, the most flexible, good all-round choice for a Tier 8 battleship for the team battles. The North Carolina, it's not bad. It's quite good at tanking the damage, but the dispersion's pretty horrible, although that's less of a factor in team battles. The battleships aren't there so much to do the damage, although it's a really nice bonus if they can, as to soak up damage from the enemy team and to basically be the muscle to push in on the enemy when it's time. And the North Carolina can do that. The biggest factor against it is actually the fact that it's about 4 or 5 knots slower than either the Amagi or the Tirpitz. And the Amagi itself, well, it's got a really nice array of firepower, but it's also probably the most fragile of the three, and that, again, that's important, because the role of the battleship in the team battles is to take a punching, basically. So given the way that we were playing, as I've said, we were being more aggressive, we were doing things that we wouldn't do in ordinary team battles, the Amagi just became somewhat unsuitable. Now, one of the suggestions I did see was that the game be played with different tiers. So you might have, the first match be like tier 5, the second match be tier 8, and the third match be tier 10. And I can kind of see why it would be nice to have the variety, but I'm not sure that would work, because it has to be something that teams can train with. So at the moment, the way the team battles are, it's tier 8, it's tier 7 and tier 8, and nobody's going to take tier 7s, basically, because it puts you at a disadvantage, if nothing else, a hit points disadvantage, especially with the battleships. So it's a nice idea in theory, but you would have to then have some kind of regular game mode where people could actually play that on the live server. So barring that happening, where there's some kind of team battles but with lower tiers, I think it's probably only ever going to be tier 8 or maybe tier 10 at most. And honestly, I'd rather tier 8 than tier 10, because you'd end up with shimikazes. But having said that, because of the more coordinated nature of team battles, maybe it would matter a bit less, because the destroyers are... You can get the early spotting in, and of course they've got the ability to lay down smoke, which is useful for themselves and their allies. One of the things that we explicitly didn't do, either team, was lay down... our destroyers didn't lay down smoke for the battleships or cruisers, for instance, just to keep that pace of battle going. But, of course, there are carriers doing things. There's almost guaranteed to be carriers. It's very, very rare to find a team without carriers. And so carriers, of course, can spot destroyers quite easily. So maybe that would be negated a little bit, but I don't know. I think it being tier 8 is generally fine. It's just unfortunate in a way that the best ones for team battles, the ones that have the best characteristics, are premiums. I mean, I haven't even mentioned the Kutuzov, which, not so much for doing the damage, but it's got the best anti-air rating at tier 8 pretty much. I'm not sure if it is the best actually, but it's at least on par with the New Orleans. So, because it's got the really good range, it's almost got battleship ranges with those guns. It's like 19.2 kilometers, combined with that fantastic anti-air ability, combined with the fact that it can lay down smoke. So, yeah, it's kind of like a natural complement to the Atagos. You can have one Kutuzov to shield the carrier, to provide extra anti-aircraft, and then the Atagos are like, they're the firepower, and the battleships and the muscle. So it can end up being fairly codified, and I think this goes back to the maps, because watching the World of Tanks guys playing, there were kind of standard setups for different maps. Cliff, for instance, tended to be lots of bat chats. In fact, I think of all the Cliff games I saw, there were very few games where it wasn't just all bat chats and an RU-251. So even if you did have a kind of a fixed map rotation where you knew what map you were going to get, so you knew what team lineup to take, you don't really get away from the problem of, well, okay, on that map it's going to be this setup, rather than, okay, we're just going to take sort of this one general setup. So it kind of makes for a little bit more variety, but not that much more, I feel. So that's in terms of the format. I mean, what we were doing was a show match, and I think it maybe could have been made a bit more clear. There were, in various places, bits of advertising for it that were like, well, watch these, top pro players, and we did have some very good players. Like Strangers on our side, for instance, our team captain is a super test coordinator on EU. He's a very, very good player. But the rest of us, I mean, the reason we were there is because we've got YouTube channels and streams and whatever, and some people that do are also very good players. I mean, when we did the initial Dream Team, we had Flamu, who was our team captain. Strangers actually came on board relatively late. They only asked him about a week and a half in advance, something like that. But that was Flamu couldn't make it, and we also had one of the other Dream Team stream guys, Voulez-Vous, who through work commitments again just couldn't make it. So Arun was another rather last minute addition. So I think out of all the issues I've mentioned, I mean, these are things that just need some testing and refining. And with that testing and refining, once it's identified, what will work best for the team format, I think there is absolutely no reason actually why this can't be an esport event. I mean, my initial reaction against it was, but, the RNG in the shooting, I mean, oh my god. But actually, if a team's focusing fire, and if they're playing correctly, like the most important parts of the game really don't have much to do with RNG at all. The biggest RNG factor, actually, that will affect the kind of esports side of it is the fact that it is actually pure RNG as to whether HE shells will set fires or not, because fire damage is a very important component even of taking down battleships. And you can just have instances where you can fire literally 100 shells and get one fire out of it, and that's pure RNG. That is an issue if you need to take down a battleship. But apart from that, the reason why the cruisers are the Atagos are the main kind of the bulk of the damage dealers in the team is because they've got the rate of fire. They can just fire HE. Hell, against a broadside battleship they can fire AP, and because of that rate of fire compared to the battleships, they are even a couple of missed shells. It doesn't matter if everyone's concentrating fire and everyone is going for the same targets. Then just the sheer weight of shells will take down an enemy. And the battleships, of course, they're not idle as well. If you get lucky, if you get citadels against cruisers, or you manage to knock out turrets, or you're hitting other battleships, you are still contributing damage-wise, but of course, your rate of fire is that much less. Although, with the turpits, I mentioned this, one of the reasons why it's quite suitable for the team battle format is it just fires faster. So, if you've got the equipment on it to increase your or decrease your reload at the cost of turret turn time, which I think is available on the turrets, you can get it faster still. And that's just not an option with the North Carolina, even though the North Carolina might be more durable, or the Amagi, which to use its superior firepower needs to really make itself vulnerable in the process. So that's my thoughts on format. And now on to presentation. This seemed to be the bulk of people's complaints, was actually how it was shown, and the commentary that went with it, and the camera work especially. And again, I have to go back to the fact that this was all put together at a couple of weeks' notice. So not only did ourselves as the teams have relatively little time to practice, but the people casting it, which was Oliver Maxfield, I think his name is, and of course our very own EU's Ektar, Ryan Murphy, They were pretty much going into it, having both played a bit of Warships, but not really being particularly knowledgeable about it. They were both going into it blind, almost. So they had some talking points, which they ended up having to use because it became, as you will have seen, very difficult to follow what was going on the screen. And 90% of what was happening with the presentation, I think, would just be fixed by having more time for people to practice, to understand what's going on. Because a lot of it came down to the guys doing the in-game camera work, again, being thrust into a thing that they haven't done before. You know, they've had lots of practice doing the World of Tanks, and watching the World of Tanks, it's extremely polished. The people doing the in-game camera stuff, they know where to look. The guys directing the feeds, they have an idea who to look at various times. They have an idea where the action is going to take place. You know, this is stuff that they've had several years practice of doing now, in multiple tournaments across multiple regions, culminating in WGL each year, but the finals each year rather. But this was entirely new, and it was all a couple of weeks practice. So we had one camera guy per team, in addition to them obviously having the feeds from each of the players. So they could show the player point of view, they could see what the player was seeing, or they could go to the external flying camera guy. Now, in my opinion, they needed at least 2 per team, if not 3. It's just the nature of the action happening, especially on one of the maps we had, which was Shatter, which has a split spawn point. And so you've got action going on 2 flanks simultaneously. Now, the confusion with the in-game camera guys, both of whom, I have sympathy for them. They were thrust into a game that they didn't really know, in a game mode that they didn't really know, and had very little idea of what it was they were supposed to be looking for, how the action was developing, the kind of the flow of the battle. So that must have been incredibly stressful, and I have some sympathy for those guys. I wouldn't have liked to have tried to do that. Even with having a bit more knowledge of how team battles worked, I still wouldn't have liked to have been, have had that responsibility. So I think they were flailing a bit, and I think it showed, because after a while they just they might have started off trying to follow the flow, but if they didn't really know what was happening, I can understand why they then ended up just going for people shooting their guns or torpedoes in the water, and things blowing up and whatever. But the thing is, that then presents a very confused picture of what's actually going on, and that made the casters' job that much more difficult, because they've then got this very confused sequences of images, and it's really hard to make head and tails of that. And I have the advantage, I wouldn't have liked to have tried Ektar's job or Mr. Maxfield's job, even with, again, my better knowledge of what's going on, even if there'd been a better sort of flow from the camera feed, as it were, because it's still quite difficult to keep up with the action. And honestly, there's a lot here that could be improved. I think this is where most of the improvements can be made, and if nothing else, we can take from this that it identified all of these areas where things can be made better. So, we can look at it in that positive light. And it was actually interesting to hear people saying that despite the fact that it was so confused, despite the fact that they had a hard time following what was going on, that they still enjoyed it on some level. So I think what could be done next time is the actual people doing the in-client camera stuff should be a lot more knowledgeable, which would help a lot. We need more of them, which will help a lot. I think the casters themselves need better information. So even something like a dedicated feed that's just like a mini map that has player names and ship names, as labels, so they can see who is where and who's in what ship at a glance, and they can see the flow of battle on this big mini map. That alone, I think, would have been really useful for the casters, because the UI didn't really give information in a great way. They were struggling to identify who was who. and they were struggling to identify when important things were happening. Just from the UI alone. And if you, again, going back to World of Tanks, the client they use for the ESL events is somewhat different. And there are some big differences in terms of, you can see exactly how much health people have at a glance. You can see the team health at a glance. You can see which side's shells are flying through the air at a glance, because they're different coloured shell tracers. That would be really useful for warships. You could have different coloured tracers for the shells and the actual torpedoes in the water. That would make it really much clearer to see who is firing at who. It would be a lot better if they could easily see who's doing damage to who, because at the moment I don't think the client we had was a little bit modified, but it wasn't really that modified in terms of like damage numbers popping up over ships and seeing who's done that damage. So the UI for the actual client itself, that could be vastly improved, which would help out everybody. And the casters especially, well, even if they have all that information, they still, at the end of the day, need to know what they're talking about. And I think even if you have somebody who's like one of the more professional casters, somebody who does this a lot, like Oliver Maxfield, or Ektar's done it a fair bit as well at this point. But if you had alongside them somebody that really knows warships really well, somebody that has the knowledge of warships and the knowledge specifically of team battles, I think that's kind of a necessary part of the mix as well. So it all really comes back to how short notice this was put on at, and I think it was actually not bad. I think it could have been a hell of a lot worse, but I think it also threw up a lot of areas for improvement, shall we say. So honestly, I think if Wargaming cares to put the resources in, if they care to put the time and the money in and the effort, then I think there's actually a decent chance they could develop this, because it's a slower paced thing, and there's a lot more I mean, it's not to say that there's not a lot of tactics and strategy in World of Tanks, but it's also lightning fast. Battles can turn in a matter of 15-20 seconds, or a single action by a single player can absolutely determine whether a match is going to be won or lost, as happened in the very last match of the final. Because we had one of the poor Hellraisers guys actually managed to get himself stuck, and that entirely changed the outcome of the battle. So things like that, it's also fast paced. Now, the slower pace of warships and the more kind of considered nature of it, I think could make for an interestingly different experience, especially when you've got carriers in the mix, because you've not only got the warships doing what the warships are doing, but then you've got the two carrier players against each other, which is almost a different game in of itself, because if you've played carriers at all, you will know how different an experience that is from playing in cruisers, battleships, or destroyers. It's almost a game within the game, if you like. It's often compared to more of an RTS style of thing. So you need somebody that has knowledge of all of this to really bring it out for an audience. But I think if you get the right recipe, if you get the UI fixed, if you get the in-client camera stuff fixed, if you get the right casters in place, if you get people that actually have a chance to practice a bit more beforehand, if you get the format changed such that it kind of promotes more active gameplay and it's not going to be 18-20 minute games that get won or lost on points, then honestly I think there is actually a future for this. Having initially got in and have been entirely skeptical about making this an esport, I think actually they could do it if they cared to. So that was my thoughts on the event itself. Otherwise, I really enjoyed myself. This is the first time I've been at an ESL event of any kind. With the passes we had, we actually got to sit down in the arena and watch this stuff happening live, and it was actually really interesting. I've watched in previous years some stuff on Twitch, and in fact my first experience of it, there's been several rule changes in the last couple of years. Having talked about the format needs to be looked at, I mean, it's not like World of Tanks doesn't have rule changes based on stuff that happens in the tournaments and in the finals. So that part is just an ongoing process of esports generally, across any game. But it was fun, though. It was really fun to watch, and you're sitting there and you're thinking, yeah, it's just World of Tanks. And I've seen this online before, and it's like, well, actually, no, I'm really getting into this. So it was really good fun to sit and watch, and I'm glad that I accepted. I was a bit kind of like, I had to think about it, because I knew it was going to be all expenses paid, but then I was like, well, there's going to be a lot of people I'm going to be sitting in front of. And as you may or may not know, I've got Asperger's. I'm on the autistic spectrum, so dealing with lots of people is not my forte. But possibly on the back of having enjoyed going to Tankfest so much last year, it was actually really fun. And when it came to it, going up on stage, it was actually fine. It was slightly nerve-wracking, but because there wasn't the pressure there, because we were just doing it for fun, basically, I think that made it much more relaxed. I can only imagine the kind of pressure that the World of Tanks teams were under, though. Because, you're competing for a fairly big cash prize. There's a real incentive to win. And if you lose out, well, that can affect things like sponsorships and whatever. So that's a lot of pressure, and we just didn't have that. We were just there to enjoy ourselves, and I hope that came through it. But it still was a slightly surreal experience for all that. Just being up there on stage and having all these cameras pointed at me, and having watched the thing back, it's like all of us were very serious business face, because I was thinking to myself beforehand, I'll look at the audience and I'll smile and try and look happy with what I'm doing, and as it was, I was just so concentrated on the game. And it's funny, at one point they actually commented after the second battle, you think they look happier because they've just won this game, but we're also kind of like concentrated on what we're doing, that we're not really thinking about that. But yeah, and then when it was the best of three happened, and it was over, and we discovered we'd actually won a thing. Well, that was just like, oh, okay, we won some chairs. Okay, because we had no idea in advance. That was a surprise for everybody, that there was actually going to be a prize. So that was a nice little thing of Wargaming to do that. And again, I think that was probably a relatively last minute thing. But on the whole, yes, absolutely, I would go again if they invited me. It was a lot of fun. The travel, not so much. Travelling on Thursday, I got in quite late. I think Jingles mentioned this. It was about just after 10 p.m. Warsaw time, CET, when I actually landed, and then it probably took the better part of an hour to get luggage, get to the airport, all that kind of thing. And it was, I just went to bed at that point. It was quite late, and everyone else I think most people had at least a couple of hours to go and get food or go to a bar or whatever, but no. And then on the Saturday, the Friday rather, we didn't have that much chance to again do anything, because we were whisked off to an office, and we did all those silly promo things, and we spent a couple of hours there having photos taken and doing all the video stuff. I had makeup put on, good lord. And at that point, we went off to the actual event arena, expecting to have some boxes where we could put our stuff and practice, and that wasn't the case at all. So instead we just kind of hung around and watched the matches, and enjoyed the catering. So yeah, that part could have been like, we had a lot of downtime on the Friday. Maybe it would have been nice if they'd gone, right, okay, you can just go and do whatever. But no, they wanted us around, basically. So anyway, and then the Saturday itself, I mean, we actually got to practice a bit, and it was fine, and we had less time for watching stuff, but we did watch the finals after us. So yeah, it was a lot of fun being there. And if they invite me again next year, well, we'll see. We'll see if they want to do it again as an exhibition thing. And maybe they'll have more idea, if they do, what they want to do with it. And maybe they will be a bit more organised in terms of even just presenting it to the crowd. Because there were, one of the suggestions I saw on, I think Reddit was, that they could have, or possibly it was the EU forums, they could have used some of the bits of downtime in between matches, in between teams playing, to actually put up some kind of like clips about what is World of Warships. How is it different? How does it play? What do the various classes of ships do? All that kind of thing, because I think a lot of the audience probably didn't know the first thing about World of Warships. They were just there for World of Tanks. And it was actually interesting because some of the guys I was with, like Arun, for instance, or Earl Grey, they're kind of in the opposite boat. Ho, ho, ho. Because they really only play warships. And so them sitting down and watching all this World of Tanks stuff was like, oh, this is actually quite interesting to watch. You know, wouldn't necessarily want to play it, but watching the ESL stuff's quite good. So, yeah, there are vast opportunities to make this better and to actually make this work. And hopefully I can be a part of that next time if they do another exhibition match or if they just decide to do some kind of serious tournament thing. I don't know. We'll see. The future is interesting in that regard. So, hopefully you have enjoyed this sort of rambling discussion of my own thoughts on what we did, what there was, what could have been done better. And you can add your own thoughts below, of course, in the comments section. You can hit the like button. You can go and actually watch the VOD, see it as it happened, with all the audio, because I'll have put some of it up, but not the whole thing. Obviously, I'll have muted the audio in the process. But yeah, I do recommend it, and maybe you can form your own opinions if you haven't seen it already. And yes, if you haven't subbed to my channel, you can already. Wow, that was good English. If you haven't subbed to my channel already, then you can, of course, do that. And as always, stay tuned for more.